This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. The churches belong to God, but he doesn't seem to care about them. It's Don't Look Now, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books or short stories in this instance. It's spooky season. It's a listener request. It's Don't Look Now. We have every one of our segments, so we're just going to get right into it. In case you haven't seen or read and need a little bit of a primer, let's sum it up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Following the tragic death of their young daughter, married couple John and Laura are spending time in Venice. They meet a pair of elderly sisters, one of whom is blind. They reveal to Laura that the blind sister is also psychic, and that she saw their daughter sitting by them, and that she was happy. Laura is overcome with joy by this revelation. John is suspicious of the sisters' intentions, but initially humors Laura because he likes seeing her happy. The sisters eventually pass another message on to Laura, that the couple should leave Venice immediately because something bad is going to happen. They also tell her that John also has the gift of second sight. Shortly after, the couple receives a message that their young son, back at school in England, has had a medical emergency. Laura leaves for England that same day. However, shortly after seeing her off, John sees what he thinks is Laura on another boat, accompanied by the sisters. This sends him into a panic, thinking that they had ill intentions after all and could be taking advantage of Laura's grief. John goes to the police in an effort to track them down. However, he later receives a call from England and is surprised to hear Laura's voice. He then gets word that the police located the sisters and took them into custody. John is forced to backtrack on everything he said while apologizing profusely. While heading back to his hotel, John sees what he thinks is a small child running in fear from something. John chases her down to try and help, but it is revealed that it's not a child at all, but an old woman with dwarfism who is also a murderer who has been on the loose in Venice. She murders John, and as he dies, he realizes that he didn't see Laura on the boat. He had a vision of her attending his future funeral.
All right, you are now caught up in case you missed the film or the short story. I have so many questions, so let's get into it in... Is that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
All right, so a lot of this movie is symbolism and metaphor, and I have a lot of questions about, many of my questions are about how much of that comes from the story versus how much of that was, created for the film, because this movie is very interesting. You have a note about it later, but it reminded us both a lot of like Solaris in terms of the vibe, the overall feel.
Yes, the 70s vibes.
The whole 70s of it. It's in a similar vein of the kind of pace and everything. And it's similar in the sense that a lot of it is, like I said, very symbolic, very allegorical, metaphorical, whatever. Yeah. I want to know how much of that comes from the story. So, first up, and this is less metaphor and more just, it was the first thing that I found creepy in the movie. We were introduced to our characters in England. John is looking at some pictures, some slides from a church. And in one of the slides, he sees this woman this person in a red hood, a red jacket, sitting in one of the pews. We don't know yet, but we eventually would come to assume that this is the church that he will be going to work on later in the film. They've sent him pictures for research or whatever. And meanwhile, we're cutting back and forth with his daughter playing outside, both of his children playing outside, his son and his daughter playing outside, and the daughter is wearing a red raincoat that looks very similar to this character in the picture. And this also it's not lost on John. He notices this strange similarity and is intrigued by this character in the pew. And I want to know if that was the first thing I found it very subtly creepy very quickly. It's a fun little, immediately okay, something's weird's going on. And I want to know if that scene with the picture and him and the parallel to his daughter in the red coat comes from the book.
Well, the same character does wear a hooded red coat in the book, but we don't see a picture of that person in the church.
Okay. And does his daughter wear a red raincoat, or is that mentioned at all?
It's not mentioned.
Okay. All right. So no. So essentially no, other than the character that is in the picture does wear a red coat.
Yes.
Okay. Or at least the character we are to assume that is in the picture. There's no confirmation.
Yeah, there's no confirmation of that, but it is the exact same
yeah.
coat. It's a very specific type of hood called a pixie hood.
Okay.
That has the point at the top.
Yes.
I know that because in the story they call it a pixie hood.
There you go.
Every single time.
There you go. And as I talked about, he's looking at these pictures, and his daughter's playing out by the pond, and he has this moment where he spills, and we'll talk. I have notes more about this whole moment later, and the odds and ends, and what's going on here, sort of in the film language and the film technique. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But ultimately what happens is he ends up spilling something that gets onto this one picture, and either the liquid that he spills is red, or the liquid causes the red from the painting to run. I'm not sure which.
I think it's whiskey that he spills. So
and
I
maybe
think it's supposed to be the ink
from
the photo.
From the photo running or something like that. Although if it's a slide, I thought those are basically pressed. I could be wrong. I don't know. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Whatever it is, this red liquid starts running from the character in the red.
Blood.
It looks like blood, but it's coming from the character in the red jacket, and kind of looping around. And as this is happening, you see this sort of dawning look of apprehension on John's face as he doesn't know what, but it kind of has this premonition of what's about to happen to his daughter. And I wanted to know if because that's a very interesting setup and starts us right in on something being not off necessarily, but maybe a little bit strange about him, and him having some sort of maybe power or whatever. Is that from the book?
No, none of that is from the book.
Okay.
The short story actually starts with John and Laura in Venice.
Okay,
so we don't get any of that opening sequence with the daughter.
Okay.
And that was something that I had put in better in the movie. Part of what I liked in the short story was that there is this initial mystery that we know something bad has happened that has plunged Laura into this deep depression.
Right.
So for a few pages at the beginning, we have this what happened, kind of mystery. But I don't think that holds a candle to how dramatic and artsy the opening scene of the film is.
Yeah, like I said, I'll talk more about that in the odds and ends. I have some notes again about sort of in the film and with the editing and everything, what's going on. It's really interesting. But it's honestly, and this is a bit of a spoiler. It was my favorite part of the movie. Mm-hmm. After that, the movie got a little less interesting to me, a little less sort of. I feel like they used a lot of their. Felt like there was a lot going on in that opening 10 minutes. Yeah. Both visually, thematically, and just
they put all their energy into that opening.
It felt
10
like
minutes.
They dumped all of the exhausted. Not I don't want to say all of their creative energy in that, because again the whole movie is quite good overall and it has a lot going on. But that opening scene is particularly striking. Interesting. Okay. So one of the things we see a lot in the opening and throughout the movie, in the opening we see it in the pond as well as some other places, which is reflections. We see like reflections of his daughter walking around by the pond. Later on in the bathroom with the sisters and Laura, we see the reflections of the sisters and her in the mirrors. There's like a lot of mirrors everywhere. And so we get a lot of looking into mirrors, looking at reflections. And I wanted to know if any of that visual motif came from the book, if there's mentions of mirrors. Or again, obviously I wasn't expecting like the shot of the daughter walking and we see that reflection in the pond. I'm assuming that's not really translating from the book in any way, but there's other, like the scene in the bathroom with the mirrors could be something that came, you know, the taught, like, you know, seeing her reflection and stuff that could have come from the book. So is any of that use of reflection something that they pulled from the book?
I would not say that it is. I don't recall any mentions of like looking at anyone's reflection or like any kind of emphasis on mirrors or anything like that.
Yeah.
There might have been, but if there was, it was not emphasized enough for me to notice it.
Okay.
So I'm going to call that the film language.
Yeah. Okay. And again, I have some more notes about in a little bit here, specifically in relation to the sisters. And I think, and we'll discuss why I think they're using reflections and stuff. That one I was not quite as clear. I have some more, or I didn't have quite as solid of like sort of theories about like what they're trying to say by the use of reflection in this particular instance. But that being said, we'll talk a little bit more about it in a little bit here. Does she help? So then we get to the restroom. And I just thought the scene was really funny to me. Daughter dies. We're moving quite a bit forward here. We're in Venice now. The daughter drowns, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But the daughter drowns, and then they're in Venice now. Months later, ostensibly, it would seem like. And they're at this restaurant having dinner, and Laura goes into the restroom to help. At one point, like, I think what happens is like John opens a window and the wind blows in and something gets in the eye of one of these old ladies.
Yeah, I think that's
and
what
then
happens.
they go into the bathroom and then Laura goes in to like kind of check on them and see if they're okay. And in the restroom, these two ladies just immediately, one of them turns to the other and is like, "My sister's psychic." And she's like, "Okay." And just the bluntness with which that line was delivered made me laugh out loud. And I want to know if they reveal, if the reveal of the psychic sister is quite so comical in the book.
Well, Laura doesn't go to help them in the book. She does go to the bathroom like at the same time as them. But otherwise, they reveal to her in the bathroom that the sister is psychic.
And that she's seeing the daughter.
She's seeing the daughter.
Okay. Back to the symbolism and recurring visual motifs in the film. One of the biggest ones is the use of water and liquid as a persistent visual motif throughout the film. And I want to know if that comes from the book, and then if it's not, I want to know if that comes from the book, and we'll discuss sort of what I think or what we think they're going for with the water symbolism. But did it come from the book first, most importantly?
Similar to the use of mirrors and reflections, I would say no.
Okay.
I mean, they're in Venice, so
the book does
obviously
take place
there,
in Venice, so there is,
obviously
yes.
there are mentions of like water and canals.
Yeah.
But I would not say that it's used in the same way that the film uses it.
Okay.
And probably the most kind of stark example of that is Christine, because in the movie she drowns.
Yes.
And in the book, it's implied that she died from meningitis.
Okay.
So...
Okay, so yeah, that definitely is the movie adding, or making one of the most, important events in the film and tying that directly to water in a way where the book does not. And I think maybe the use of water and the recurring, because it's not just, obviously they're in Venice later on, and then the opening, the daughter drowns, but we have the constant use of the spilling liquids happens
there's a
quite
lot
a
of
few
spilling
times.
liquid in this.
And also rain and running water and showers and just lots of water that we see in different capacities and stuff like that. And I don't know what you think, but I'd like to get your opinion on it and see, because to me, I think what they're going for here potentially is, because ultimately the story ends up being about grief and ultimately that's really what it's about, is grief, dealing with loss, that sort of thing. And I think what they're going for with the water here potentially is the water is as a symbol of sort of the irretractability of life, if that's a word. I think it's a word. I know retractability is, and I think unretractability, whatever.
That sounds like
Is there a
word.
better word?
I don't know. I mean, they have it flagged as a spelling error in Google Docs.
Well,
but
whatever. I feel like irretractability
I
is.
like it.
Like the events that are done can't be undone, similar
Right.
to how once water is spilled, you can't, there's no putting it back in the bottle or whatever. No crying over spilled milk being like a sort of fun, playful turn on that. But to me, I'm wondering if that's sort of the direction they're going. Also, water ultimately consumes all things. Like it, it's a very can be a very destructive force, and that was, to me, that was thematically what it felt like they were going for here, because these events, so much of it has to do with grief and regret and sort of dealing with this tragic event and the fallout from it. It felt to me like the water had a lot to do with how desperately they wish this thing had never happened, but it can't be undone. It is.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
I would say that that's spot on.
To me, that's what it felt like. I would be interested to see if people got, saw or
Right.
had some
Well,
other.
especially the continued use of spilling
Yes,
liquid.
that was the main
I
reason.
think if it had just been like rain and the canal water, I might be like, maybe they're trying to say something else or something slightly different. But definitely the recurring spilling liquid to me, it's symbolizing that kind of inability to put something back once it has been done. You can't undo.
And you have to then thus deal with it.
Yeah.
And how you deal with it is sort of what the movie ultimately ends up being about. Cool. So at one point, and at this restaurant, when Laura comes back to the table, she kind of like faints. She has like
she has a fit of the vapors.
And falls over, and they end up taking her to the hospital. And while she's in the hospital, she's near like the kids ward or something. She's in a room near the kids ward. They can see all these kids playing in the hospital. And one of the kids has the exact same ball that their daughter was playing with in the opening scene when she drowns. Again, just a sort of little creepy, off-putting sort of thing, which you might not even notice. Like it's subtle enough.
I'm going to be honest, I didn't notice that until I saw it in your notes.
It is one of those things that they didn't spend a lot of time like reinforcing or like focusing on. I just know. I mean, you see a couple shots where the camera's like only looking at that kid, but we don't ever get like a zoom in on the ball or anything. You know what I mean? Which this movie does use quite a bit of zooms for things to emphasize stuff. Which is something I always find interesting about, like, that's a very uncouth thing to do in modern cinema, but in the 70s and stuff, zooms were all over the place.
All the rage.
Yeah, they use them all the time for stuff. But yeah, it is interesting how now barring certain specific circumstances, you move the camera, not the lens. But anyways, it is interesting. But yeah, so I wanted to know if that, if a kid in the hospital having the same ball is something that's mentioned.
No,
okay.
We don't ever go to the hospital in the book.
Does she have a fainting attack?
No.
Oh, okay.
No fainting attack. There's never like a specific ball or toy mentioned that's connected with the daughter.
Yeah.
So none of that is from the book.
Okay. We move forward a little bit, and we find out why they're in Venice, which is John restoring this church. Like I said, I ostensibly the church in the pictures from the beginning, we would assume that maybe they had been planning this trip, or he had been planning and working on this trip, coming to Venice to help restore this church. He's like some sort of, I don't even know what the word would be.
Restoration.
Yeah, like archaeological or. Architectural
not an
restoration.
archivist, but
yeah, because he does all kinds of stuff. He's like at one point he's like helping them like put statues back up. He's like working on he's like helping work on he's like overseeing it. He's not doing the labor.
He's not like a construction worker. He's the management.
He's like the boss who's
has
like
a degree in
some sort of like
or
art.
other.
He has a degree in like historical like buildings or like something like that. And because at one point he's like they bring him a bunch of mosaic pieces and he's looking at them and seeing if they look right and that sort of thing. It's really interesting to me that he has such a unique, interesting job. I thought that was really fascinating. And that's my question is that from the book? Does he have this this job of restoring this church, is it that very unique, interesting job, and is that why they're in Venice?
That is not why they're in Venice in the book. They are just on vacation.
Okay.
Definitely something that I had in better in the movie.
I mean,
think the movie's version's way more interesting.
It's way more interesting.
For a lot of reasons.
It's interesting. I always enjoy when a movie has somebody whose job is something really unique and interesting that clearly like that's a real thing people do.
Yeah.
But it's something you never see people do in movie. You know what I mean? Like people always have boring generic jobs in movie. Like tend to have like, they're like, if there's in most movies his character would be like an artist. Or what, you know what I mean? Like just a generic where this is like a very specific thing, and we see him doing his job, which is really interesting. And I think it lends to the thematic, some of the thematic elements of the film, in that he's literally trying to put this church together piece by piece. Put this church back together piece by piece. And spoilers, by the way, the church is his life. Like that's
and it's a very small pieces too.
Yes.
Like this very intricate work that he's trying to do.
Yeah.
And it seems like no one else is interested in really helping him.
Nobody else is really interested in helping, and he's struggling at it, and at one point he almost dies trying to do it, and like almost falls off. And it's just I found that a very and the fact that it's just from the movie I thought was, or finding out that it's just from the movie is a very clever change on the writer's part to just tweak the reason they're in Venice to something that adds to the metaphor.
Adds so much depth to not only the metaphor but like the story and his character.
So speaking of the church he's restoring, we end up then meeting the bishop, who I assume is in charge of this church, and several others or whatever. And they meet him, and I think he's only ever referred to as the bishop. He might have a last name, I can't recall. But when they meet him, he could not give less of a fuck about this church. And they're having this conversation about it, and after they talk to him, Laura's like, it seems like he does not care about this at all. And they're just like, he's like, yeah, he's a weird dude or whatever. And I wanted to know if the bishop and his lack of interest in the church comes from the book.
No, the bishop is another movie ad, not from the book.
He was probably the part I had the most trouble figuring out what we were supposed to be getting from him, other than like maybe a vague critique of religion in general or something. But like
very vague.
But yeah, because he recurs later, it like when John is dying at the end. Like getting it, like running through the city, we randomly flash back to him like startling awake.
Yeah, we randomly cut back a couple times to him like, startling himself awake in bed like he's dreaming what's happening.
Yeah, and I had a tough time trying to parse what we were supposed to be getting out of that. I was like, I'm not sure what this relationship is supposed to be. And there's also this little moment here, and obviously since the character's not in the book, this isn't in the book. But I was going to ask about it, hoping that if it was in the book, you could maybe provide some clarity, because this is another question I had. Is there's this moment when they're walking and talking, and at one point there's this inserted, very intentional close-up of the bishop like throwing his arm out, almost like stopping Laura from like walking forward at one. He does. Did you notice this shot I'm talking about?
I didn't.
It's such a brief shot. It's this little moment of the priest like, and I'm trying to figure out what it could mean or what it ties into. And this movie does so much with like premonition and like,
I mean, maybe he's supposed to have some kind of premonition powers as well.
Yeah, that's very possible. And maybe that ties into his lack of interest in the work going on at the church, is that he knows it's not going to be completed because he knows John is going to die, or I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, it could also be just a lack of interest in like the physical world altogether.
Well, that opening line from that I read for the intro is his line in the movie. The churches belong to God, but he doesn't seem to care about them. Yeah. That's his line in the movie, and I definitely think there's some. His character is definitely some sort of critique, some sort of message about religion. I'm just not super sure what it is. I had a little bit of a tough time figuring out exactly what was trying to be said there. But he has this scene where he like throws his arm out in front of Laura, or almost like hits her, and she kind of like startles back, and then we just move on like nothing ever happened. And it was so strange, and there's no like the camera doesn't spin around revealing like that she almost like stepped off into the wall. You know what I mean? Like there's ostensibly no like obvious explanation for why he did that. And if anybody else has seen this movie enough to know, like, or has read about this, I'm sure there's plenty of people who have dissected this movie because there's a lot going on. If you know what I'm talking about and what that scene is, I would love to hear like what you think's going on there, and overall just about the bishop in general, because he's an interesting character, and we had a little bit of a tough time figuring him out.
It is interesting, and I'm not really sure what the message about religion would exactly be with this character, because he's kind of the opposite of what we usually see in that type of religious character, where he seems like he's not particularly interested in the physical world. And usually I feel like we see the opposite of that, where we have like the priest character who's too interested in the physical world.
And the critique there being that like the church, quote unquote, is like a weird bastardization of like of like the true religion, because they care too much about like physical things, and and a critique of the church over the centuries, and the wealth they've hoarded, and the wrongs they've committed. And I'm using the church, not just, it's the Catholic Church here, but I just mean like
like religion and
vaguely like religion,
vaguely.
like organized religion in general here. Is that would, like, I agree. That's generally the kind of character you would see here. And so it is, again, that's why I find him to be a really interesting character. And then the recurring moments with him, because he doesn't really come back very much other than like these cut in shots of him like startling awake like at dramatic moments. And it is interesting.
Yeah. So if you have thoughts on the bishop,
would love to hear him.
Know.
Would love to hear him. All right, we talked about it a lot in the prequel, and that is the love scene, the sex scene in this movie that was very controversial. Lots of drama around it, lots of rumors, all that sort of stuff because of its explicit nature at the time, or relatively explicit nature at the time. And I want to know if this comes from the book.
So they definitely have sex in the book, but it is not shown.
Okay.
I'm going to read a couple lines
That's
here.
interesting, because I had read, and I meant to mention this in the prequel, and I didn't. At one point, I was like, I have a note about that I want to talk about, and then I forgot to. I had read in some of my research that the director or whatever had added that scene, that it wasn't in the original script or wasn't in the book or whatever, and that they had added that scene to add a... because otherwise they felt that the relationship between Laura and John was like too negative, like it was only fighting, and like they wanted to add a moment of like, look, they do love each other, they care for each other, let's show them being together kind of thing, as opposed to like just like arguing and stuff, and like not getting along, and so that was supposedly why they added it. So I was surprised to hear that, or I guess I'm not necessarily surprised. Go ahead, sorry.
Okay. Now, he thought afterwards, now at last is the moment to make love. And he went back into the bedroom, and she understood, and opened her arms and smiled. Such blessed relief after all those weeks of restraint. The thing is, she said later, fixing her earrings before the looking glass, I'm not really terribly hungry.
Okay. So that actually even harkens to kind of what we get in the movie, with the getting ready...
Yeah,
for
they're
dinner
kind of
afterwards.
smashed
like,
right
that smashes
together.
Those together, and that almost feels like what we get in the movie, because I do think, and that was, there's some really clever cutting, and we talked about in the prequel that they did this partially, if not exclusively initially, to avoid to get around censors.
Yes.
In terms of cutting back and forth between them getting dressed to go out to dinner afterwards with the actual sex scene, because that way they would show part of, an intimate moment and then cut away before you could see too much or whatever. That would end up getting it censored. And I thought there was some clever back and forth with like matching actions of like hips thrusting, but then cutting to him pulling his pants on and like zipping, and like kind of his hips go forward as he zips his pants up, and then like her rubbing her hips and cutting to her like putting on, like doing something with her hips or adjusting her belt or something. Like they match cut a lot of actions in ways, and match cut just means like back to back cuts kind of matching basically. And I thought it was really interesting and really well done. And it is apart from the potentially problematic nature of the filming of it, which we discussed a little bit or at least sounding like potentially problematic.
Right, there were
of the
rumors about it.
Yeah, and the rumors aren't necessarily as problematic, other than Warren Beatty felt like getting cheated on, but. Because ostensibly, if she was totally into it, them having sex, I don't care if they had sex or not, like actually had sex or not, other than like she's cheating on Warren Beatty, which that sucks for him. But like, but I was speaking more about like her talking about the line where she said like she went blank, and because that definitely harkens to like some traumatic sounding experiences.
Yeah.
But it's also went on to, she was also saying that within the context of like, nobody had filmed a sex scene like this, so I didn't really know what to do. So we just kind of like let him talk us through it. So I don't know. Anyways. But apart from that, I did think it is a very critically, or was like a rather critically acclaimed sort of sex scene because of the way it was cut and edited together.
Yeah,
so I'm not saying
I
anything
actually
new here.
liked the sex scene. It worked for me.
Yeah,
like
I
to
agree.
me, it rang realistic and didn't feel like porn the way that some sex scenes in modern films can kind of feel
bad
like
porn.
Yeah. I liked the way that it was all cut together, the match cuts, like you said. And I also thought that it was a decent expansion on what's mentioned in the story. I thought it was a good way to show like their relationship and connection.
Which was what the director specifically wanted to do that scene for.
The only thing I didn't really like about it was the 70s flute music.
You can't get away from the bad 70s sex music. Can never escape it.
The jazzy flute is really just something.
It's a thing. It's a thing. So as they're going out for dinner, after they have sex, they're sort of confronted by the hotel manager or whatever, and he's like, "Oh, you coming here for dinner?" And they're like, "No, we're going out," and he's very disappointed. And then as they're walking out, we cut to this shot that lingers on a bunch of furniture in like the lobby, like covered with sheets and stuff. And initially, I thought we were to take this scene to be telling us that this hotel was like struggling and like potentially closing or something like that, and like, you know, they're like desperate for them to come eat there and like spend their money
their
there.
Business.
And like the lingering shot on the sheets all over the all over the furniture and that sort of thing. But ultimately we find out that they're actually just like closing for the season. Like, and that's what why it's covered and stuff. But I wanted to know if any of that element comes from the book, and then I want to discuss potentially what it might be trying to tell us, like what that means.
That's not something that I recall being mentioned ever in the book. The hotel that they're staying in seems like it's doing fine.
Okay. Initially, I did think like if it was struggling and potentially closing or whatever, I thought that was going to be sort of maybe symbolism for like their struggling marriage or something, you know, and it's not particularly interesting symbolism, honestly. But then with it closing for the season, and the only reason it really matters is that they linger on some of those elements.
Yes.
The film lingers on it in a way that feels meaningful. Like the shot of the covered furniture, we linger on that long enough that it's not just like, they don't just walk through and we see in the background that they're like closing down or whatever. It's like, look at this. And then I was like, well, if they're just closing for the season, I thought maybe what we're going for here is it's more so of about like the time running out on their marriage or their relationship or their ability to time is running out on their ability to sort of handle this trauma together. Potentially. I don't know. I that seems weak to me. I'm not tied to that. It was the only thing that like stuck out in my head of trying to figure out what we could be intended to be getting from this.
I think it's also reminiscent of the way that sometimes furniture is covered for like a funeral.
Yeah.
Like in conjunction with death.
That's true, yeah. Or here's the other thing. It's a foreshadowing. No, I think you're right in the sense that it's foreshadowing in the same way a lot of the other stuff is, in that this is the place where John is staying. And what happens when somebody dies, their house, all the furniture gets covered.
Yeah.
You know, like at the beginning of Jumanji or whatever, when they go into they go into the house and all the furniture's covered in sheets and everything. Essentially, this hotel is his house right now.
Yes.
And so I think you're right that this is actually potentially more so foreshadowing his eventual demise. I think that's interesting. I like that. While they're out after dinner, I think that's when this happens. They see a little person in a red coat running around that he thinks is his daughter. Or I don't know if he necessarily thinks that right away. But they start seeing this person in a red coat running around in the labyrinthian streets of Venice. And they're kind of chasing them around, trying to figure out who they are, where they're going, that sort of thing. And it's our first introduction to the very, again, labyrinthian nature of Venice, and that becomes sort of important later as it becomes super disorienting, and I think very intentionally so, as he's kind of making his way around the city. Does that mysterious person in the red coat running around the streets of Venice come from the book?
Yes.
Okay.
We see that person and the same two moments in the book that we do in the movie, when they're like lost trying to find their restaurant, and then again at the very end when John is chasing that character around. And it is an interesting, I want to call it a red herring, but I don't think that's quite right. No, that's not quite right. I think I'm just attached to the idea of red. But it's an interesting little like motif, because in both the book and the movie, John is the only person in those two times who actually sees that character. Okay. So we don't like for sure know
that it's, like, real.
If this is something that is real or if he is like grief hallucinating.
Yeah. Interesting. So then we move forward a little bit, and I think it's the next day, and they're at the church, and John's working on something, and Laura's there watching, and then she kind of wanders off and stumbles across the psychic sisters, the two sisters, yes. One of whom is psychic, and they're kind of chatting, and there's this moment where she walks up to start. They like walk around a corner to start talking to each other, and right as they get around the corner, the psychic sister walks behind this metal gate thing. It's like these metal bars, and she's like looking at Laura through these metal bars. And I noticed right away that the first two times Laura talks to the psychic's sister, she's always talking to her through a plane, through a barrier. In the restaurant, it's through the reflection in the mirror. In this scene, it's through the bars. Again, it's not a real barrier, but like, because it's just open, but it is. She's behind. She very intentionally goes behind this metal fence thing, and then later on, and right after this, they go and sit down on a bench, and they're talking. And the blind sister isn't obscured, but the other sister is talking to her from behind the blind sister, and her face is like entirely covered. Yeah. Almost by the blind sister's face, again, kind of obscuring. And I was wondering if there's any reference in the book to her like talking to these characters through, I don't know. It was, again, such an interesting choice. I wanted to know if it came from the book.
Again, that's not something that I recall being mentioned. Wasn't emphasized enough for me to pick up on it. Yeah. If it was, I do think that there's a lot going on here, like with visual symbolism. Yeah. I think, constantly putting a barrier in front of the psychic sister, we're getting that she's like separate from everyone else. Yeah, she's like on another plane, kind of.
Yeah, that was what I was getting from it when we through the mirror, through these bars behind, like that she is, her existence operates sort of on a separate plane, like you said. Yeah. Of the rest of us.
Yeah, so there's always going to be a barrier there that cannot be crossed.
Although eventually, when she actually goes to the seance, that's when
the
barrier
collide.
Goes away, and we don't have that barrier between them anymore, which I thought was interesting.
And I also think we mentioned reflections earlier. We talked a little bit about that. And I think that's interesting because a reflection is essentially something that seems like reality, but is not. Yeah. It's backwards and distorted. So I think there's a lot of symbolism going on with that. Yeah. You could also factor in that mirrors have long been associated with the occult, with
as a portal to the spirit world,
or opening up to other kinds of realms.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's why they cover mirrors when people die.
Yep. We talked about it in the fried green tomatoes episode.
Yeah.
Isn't that where that happened?
Yeah, where they cover the mirror when Iggy dies.
Yep. there's this one cut-in shot, and I don't even remember when it happens. It's
It's
later.
like right before the seance.
Yeah,
I
it's like
think.
right before the seance, and John and Laura are going somewhere, maybe to the seance, like she's taking him to whatever.
I think it's when they're arguing about whether or not to go.
Yes. And we just randomly quickly cut to the two sisters who seem to be maniacally laughing.
Yeah.
And we don't know why, and then it cuts away.
Witch cackling.
Like straight up witch cackling. And we never find out why they were laughing necessarily. They are holding a picture, I think. One of them's holding one of the pictures supposedly of their family members, but we never go into that too much. Are those pictures anything from the book? I didn't.
No.
Okay. I didn't write that down at all. I was be interested to see what people thought about those pictures and what they think those mean, or what's going on there. But the evil cackling, do they evil maniacal witch laugh in the book?
No, they don't, but I did enjoy that moment.
Okay.
Overall, I thought the movie did a better job of making the sisters feel like a true red herring for danger.
Yeah, you truly don't know what their deal is and if they're good or bad the whole film until the end.
And in my opinion, they don't feel quite so sinister in the short story.
Yeah. And
Or
ultimately,
like potentially sinister, I guess.
I think the thing that ends up being really interesting in the movie is that they end up sort of just being they're not good or evil. They're just sort of...
Yeah, they're kind of neutral.
Yeah. Like, I mean, they're not evil in the sense that at the end, in the movie, the psychic one is like begging her sister to not let John leave, knowing that he's going to his death. So they're at least, they're not like intentionally sending to him to his death or anything. It wouldn't seem. But at the same time, they're not, I don't know, they don't particularly seem like friendly, helpful.
Well,
I don't know.
I think that harkens back to the portrayal of entities that have like premonition powers like throughout mythology, because they often are these kind of like neutral figures. Like you
sort
think
of like
about
chaotic neutral.
Yeah, like the oracle at Delphi in Greek mythology is neither good nor bad. She's the oracle.
Yes. Yeah. She doesn't tell you what you want to hear, just tells you what she tells you. It's like Galadriel with the mirror. What does she say? She has some... I feel like Galadriel has some line about... maybe I'm misremembering and implying something else, but I thought she had a line about...
things that were, things that are.
And some things that have not yet come to pass. That's not what I'm thinking of. I was thinking of a different line, but anyways, doesn't matter. But yeah, no, I agree. I think that's definitely what we're supposed to be getting from the psychic sister. Or both of them, honestly. So ultimately, or not ultimately, eventually we have this moment where they get woken up after the seance, where now Laura has gone to the seance, she's talked to them, they've had this experience, and John's still not like down with it at all. And then afterwards, they go to bed later or whatever, and they get a call in the middle of the night, waking them up, and that from the boarding school or whatever that their son goes to, telling them that their son has been in an accident of some sort. It's never something about fire. In the movie, they say something about fire.
Yeah, it's like an accident of some sort. In the book, he has appendicitis.
Okay, in the movie, it sounds like it's implied that they were like I don't know. She says something about fire exercises or something.
Yeah, I don't.
And I couldn't
know.
tell if it was like an accident with fire or they were like shooting guns or something. I don't know. I couldn't really tell. But he ends up getting hurt, and so Laura rushes home to England. And then John, I thought, was supposed to follow, but instead decides to kind of, or they're talking about it, and like he's like, yeah, I'll come home by the weekend or whatever. But it seems like ultimately he kind of decides not to go, and instead decides to sort of stay and like run from his grief and not go back and deal with these things. Again, sort of not actually handling the situation, sort of avoiding it.
Just shoving it down.
Yes. And I want to know if that happens in the book.
Yes, up to a point. I mean, yes, but with nuance. John does... the son does get hurt. Laura goes home to England. John is supposed to follow her like immediately. What happens in the book is that he sees her on the boat like almost immediately. So that ends up being the reason that he stays behind.
Okay.
So he's worried that she'll show up like at the hotel looking for him and he won't be there if he leaves. And then he's worried that something bad has happened to her after she doesn't like come to meet him.
Yeah. I actually, when he sees her on the boat, my initial thought in the movie was that he was on his way to go home. But I don't think that's ultimately what it was supposed to be in the movie.
No, I don't think so.
But I initially did think that. I thought that he was going, and then seeing that is what's caused him to stay. But I don't think that's actually what happened. But yeah. Okay. So after like I said, he stays. He's still working on the church, and he's working, and he goes up on some scaffolding, like this terrifying, rickety, all these workers hauling him up in this like bucket of like he crawls out onto the scaffolding onto this like hanging platform, so that he can look at the mosaic up there, and a board falls from somewhere up above and hits him and causes the thing to fall, and he's like swinging around on a rope and almost falls to his death. Very dramatic scene. Reminded me of something from like The Omen or something. And I wanted to know if that happened in the book.
None of that.
Also, we get a psychic warning about it beforehand. About him.
Something bad will happen.
Something bad will happen to him.
But none of that is from the book. None of the scaffolding and the near miss. I thought that was going to be like a complete red herring.
When he went setting up, we're oh my God, something's going to happen.
He's going to fall, something's going to happen, a rope is going to snap.
Yeah.
And I was like, he's not actually going to fall. Yeah. They're just setting us up for that. But then he did.
But see, that's the thing. If this movie were 20 years old, like newer, if this was made in the 90s or 2000s or whatever, it would be a mislead. It would be a red herring. But this it's early enough that there's just like, nope, we're just doing what you expect here.
That would be enough to send me home right away, though. Though the psychic told me I was in danger, and then I almost died. Yeah, I'm going home.
No, thanks.
And also, I'm not flying.
Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit. You mentioned it, that as he's riding on a ferry at one point, and he looks over on another boat going past, and he sees what he thinks is Laura with the two sisters on the boat. They're all dressed in black, and they're driving, and he's like, "Whoa!" And he's like, "What is she doing here?" And then he runs around trying to find her. Ultimately, this ends up sort of being a premonition of his death, of his funeral, which we'll talk about at the end a little bit, but. Does that him? You already mentioned it, but so the him seeing them is comes from the book, or thinking he sees Laura with the sisters comes from the book. Okay, but they aren't wearing black.
No, they're not wearing black.
So it's not actually a direct premonition necessarily of the funeral.
It's a premonition of her coming back for his funeral.
Okay,
but not that they're necessarily at.
Right, because it's the exact outfits and everything from the end of the film in this moment when they're actually at his funeral, which plays under the credits basically.
Yeah.
In the film, and we oh, that's what he saw there. Okay. So as he's looking for Laura, he goes to the police station and he's going to them for help because he's I can't find my wife. I think she's here somewhere, and she's with these two sisters who I don't know what their deal is, and he's also worried because this is a thing that we hadn't mentioned. I was going to ask about this. Simultaneously, there's been this sort of minimalist C plot of them finding bodies in Venice, and there's a serial killer on the loose. Is that from the book?
Yeah, a murderer is on the loose in Venice.
And so he's worried about that, and he's worried maybe these sisters have something to do with it or something he doesn't know. And so he goes to this police station. There's this great shot in the police station where he walks in and they send him up to talk to the detective. And when he opens the door to get to the detective's office, he walks into this hallway that is an eternity long with dozens of doors. It looks like something out of the Matrix movie or something. And I thought it was really interesting. And then when he goes into the detective's office, the detective is behind the shot of the detective. He's sitting at his desk, but there's this giant lamp obscuring his face, and he leans out from behind it. That cracked me up. That reminded me of something from a oh God, what's the director's name? This whole part reminded me Terry Gilliam film.
Oh yeah.
A little bit, and super interesting. I think anyway. So he's talking to this detective. About his wife and everything, and I wanted to know if that hallway with all the doors, which I'm going to say it and immediately regret it, were we going for Kafka here? Is this is that what this is?
Maybe.
I mean, Gilliam, it reminded me of something from Gilliam, and Gilliam very much draws some inspiration from Kafka at times. So I was wondering if that was what sort of because the what is the word I'm looking for? The sort of like absurd, the absurd bureaucracy of like dealing with any sort of government institution, and like the absurd like nature of it, and visualizing that in this instance by this huge, hallway of doors. There's like a million offices or whatever, and then walking into the office and the detective like weirdly leaning out from behind I don't know. Anyways, roast me. I'm sure it has nothing to do with Kafka. I've never read Kafka, so I'm wrong. But I just, anyways, is any of that from the book?
He does go to the police, and he might go to like the consulate, like the British consulate.
Okay.
I don't remember, but he does end up like going to the police with his concerns. But I don't recall that any of that like symbolism was from the book.
Yep. I thought that was really interesting. I enjoyed that. Again, it reminded me a lot, again, of like Terry Gilliam or something like that. Of just the absurdity of dealing with bureaucracy. So another element of the film that I thought was really interesting is, and we watched this, we turned on subtitles because, English subtitles, because the
sound mix
on the version we watched was really annoying. Like the sound effects, like anytime, like there's a match cut early where like a drill or somebody scream or the wife screams, and then there's like a drill was so loud, but then the dialogue was so quiet, and it was just like the dynamic range was really obnoxious to deal with. And so we turned it down so that the loud stuff wasn't like blowing out our speakers. But then I turned the subtitles on so that we could read what the people were saying whenever they were too quiet for us to hear. But what I noticed is that, and hopefully it wasn't me turning on the subtitles that caused this. I don't think it was. But our version that we watched, anytime somebody spoke Italian, there were 0 English subtitles for it.
Yeah.
Like 0, no matter what. Even simple stuff, obviously, like whenever somebody says "sì," which they say a lot, most English-speaking people know that means yes in Italian. But there was like whole sentences, tons of parts where there's just no English subtitles. And I thought that was a really interesting choice in the movie. And I wanted to know if there was usage of untranslated Italian in the book, similar to how the movie uses a bunch of untranslated Italian.
Maybe a word here and there, but nothing like in the movie.
Nothing like in the movie. Okay. And I was wondering if assuming that it wasn't something with our movie where like we weren't getting,
it was intentional.
Yeah, that this was intentional. I would imagine that what we're going for here is to sort of put us in the headspace of John being completely out of his depth in a foreign country. He speaks very little Italian.
Yes, and it is mentioned in the short story that his Italian is not very good.
Yes, he knows a little bit, enough mostly to like kind of relay a few things to some of the workers here and there, but like he knows less Italian than I knew French when I went to France for a few weeks, and I knew very little French. So like, and I could converse better than he can in this movie. And so I thought that was really interesting, and I definitely think what they're going for here is, again, to disorient us in the same way. This movie does a lot with sort of disorienting John, and I think by proxy, disorienting John, and by proxy, disorienting us with the labyrinthian sort of construction of Venice, and how confusing he's like running through, alleyways and tunnels and blah, 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 and then having all these people speaking Italian the whole time. And in very critical moments in this part, he's trying to talk to somebody. He's trying to find the sisters at one point. Yeah. And he's like, and 2 different people he talks to in the hotel or whatever that they were staying at. He's like, "Do you speak English?" And they're like, "No." And it's just like, again, I think this with the thing with the detective and all the doorways and all that sort of stuff all of that is sort of amping up the disorientation, the unease that John is going through, and putting it on us. And I think the best way, a really interesting way of doing that, is by not translating any of the Italian, so that we're just as lost as he is.
No, I agree. Assuming that was intentional. Yeah, I think that's definitely what's going on.
Yeah, and I thought that was really, really interesting, really clever, because it is. You do find it frustrating, and then I'm like, wait. Yep, that's the point.
Yep.
Yep,
I was like, meant to be frustrated.
I am meant to be frustrated by that. Yep. So then he does finally end up finding the sisters and talking to them. And he also has this phone call revealing that Laura's not there. Like, Laura is in England. Like, he gets a call, or he calls her, and he ends up talking to her on the phone. She's like, yeah, no, I'm in England. And he's like, oh, okay. And then ultimately, I don't remember what it is that spurs him to leave the sisters and go. I mean, ultimately he goes, and then as soon as he's outside, he sees the red-coated character.
Well, he knows that Laura's coming back, so I think he was going to like try to meet up with her.
Well,
I
he had just
guess.
talked to her on the phone.
But she told him she was coming right back.
Yeah, but she was still in England, so she wouldn't be back like.
But then
soon.
she is back.
Yeah, but I think that's implied to be. Oh yeah, you're right. No, she is back, because that's right. He doesn't get the phone call while he's talking to the sisters. That happens earlier, like maybe even the day before or something, or whatever.
It's a little while before, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think also the time not really making sense is also sort of intentional. Like, it doesn't really matter that the events track, the time doesn't necessarily track. But whatever happens, he goes out, and then he sees the character in the red coat, and he starts following her. And as this happens, the psychic sister is losing her mind, and it's one of the most famous quotes from the movie is she keeps screaming, "Let him not go!" And very dramatically. And I want to know if that comes from the book.
So she does go into a trance during this scene in the book, but she doesn't scream to like bring him back or not let him go. And
no, let him not go is what she says.
But it is something that I had in better in the movie initially. Because I think this is so much more creepy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's a very upsetting scene.
Yeah.
So he's chasing this red hooded figure through the city, and meanwhile Laura is also chasing him, and we get lots more of sort of the confusing cuts between alleyways and tunnels and blah blah blah. And ultimately, John sees the figure run into some place, and he runs in after. And in order to stop this character from getting away, he shuts this big metal gate and like locks it. See here, he's literally securing his fate, locking himself into the futile pursuit of his daughter. Symbolism. And I want to know if that particular moment of him locking himself in to this sort of futile gesture, this futile pursuit, comes from the book. Because while it's not. I don't want to say it's not subtle, because I think it's fairly subtle. I think if you weren't thinking about it too much.
I think if you weren't thinking about it, you wouldn't realize the symbolism.
That being said, I think it's very...
But it's also very not subtle.
I guess that's the thing, is that, and I think that's what makes it very well done symbolism, is it being subtle enough that it's not like, it's not...
This is symbolism.
Yes, but at the same time, most people would probably, or a lot of people would get what we're going for here. And so I thought that was really interesting. I want to know if that came from the book.
Yeah, he does shut them into a room in the book. So it's not like a big gate, but same idea.
Same idea, yeah.
And since we haven't like talked about this specifically yet, I don't think, I also want to mention that I really liked giving Christine a red coat at the beginning, which is not something that's mentioned in the book. I think it provided a really concise visual language that allowed us to then associate Christine with the red-coated figure in Venice without having to over-explain what's happening in John's mind.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If you didn't have that compare, that similarity, that red coat, it would be much less obvious what the whole, I think that would make the whole theme of his grief and the being consumed by grief and this desire and pursuit of his daughter, and no matter how much he insists she's dead, he's not over it, and he hasn't dealt with it, no matter how much he insists he has, and no matter how much he insists it's behind them. And so I think it would still work, but it would not be nearly as like poignant as it ends up being in the film.
And that kind of visual symbolism, I think, is something that you can do in a movie much more successfully than you can especially in a short story. Yeah. Where you don't have a lot of opportunities to mention it again and again.
Yeah. Almost done here. So I want to know, and this again, sort of a broader question that's not like a specific event in the book or something that I want to know about, but I want to know if John and Laura go through the same sort of inverted arcs that they go through in the movie. So in the movie, John is seemingly over, quote unquote, his daughter's death when they get to Venice, while Laura is clearly not. She's taking like antidepressants or something like that. And there's talk of how she's, not dealt with it well and that sort of thing. Meanwhile, John seems to be doing fine, and he's insistent, like, we're past this, we have to move on, and her seeming, and then they come across these psychics, and it seems like, she's desperate for some sort of, she's like, oh, our daughter's still with us, and it seems like she's desperate for things not to be over while he is over it, and then we sort of Laura ostensibly sort of talks through it with these psychics. Like, I think that the psychics aren't actually supposed to be are less like actually psychics. There are psychics in the movie, but they're less meant to represent actually like psychic, like dealing with your problems by using a psychic, and more so meant to represent Laura literally just talking about it. Because in the movie, there's a explicit line. It's in that moment early on where the blind woman's behind the metal grate. They're like, oh, you probably don't want to talk about that. And Laura says, no, I desperately want to talk about this.
Laura confronts it.
Yes.
And is able to deal with it and push through it.
Yeah, she literally says, no, I really need to talk about this. And so she, like, the movie is saying, like, she's actually talking about it. And it's less important how she's talking about it in this instance. I don't think the movie is necessarily, like, endorsing going to psychics to talk about your dead children or whatever. But just the act of, like, actually dealing with it, like you said, whereas John hasn't. And then, so she ostensibly kind of gets over it, works through it, and is able to go back to England.
She goes through and comes out on the other side.
Literally, she goes back to England, and then she's able to return and then come back, whereas John is not. And so they have these sort of inverted arcs where it seems like one's in one position, and then or ultimately kind of find out that they were in the... It's not even arcs so much as, I guess Laura goes through an arc.
It's journeys.
Laura goes through an arc. John is just revealed. Like, his...
Yeah,
he doesn't really go through an arc so much as his true
self is revealed.
And I want to know if we get that same dynamic in the book, because I thought that was really cool.
There's definitely more emphasis on John's portion of that in the movie, which I'll talk about in my final verdict. But it is basically the same.
Yeah.
Kind of like reversed arcs, like you said.
Yeah.
I also think there's interesting commentary on masculine and feminine
100%,
here,
I agree, yeah.
because at the beginning we have John, who is doing the like man up, stiff upper lip,
right?
We're not dealing with it, it's fine kind of thing, and Laura, who is quote unquote not dealing with it well, right? She's upset, she's emotional, she's weak and feminine.
She's clearly gone to a psychiatrist or something because she's been prescribed drugs and that sort of thing.
But we see ultimately that Laura dealing with it in a quote-unquote feminine way, right, by talking through it, is what saves her, whereas John's insistence on not dealing with it is ultimately his undoing.
Yes, it's fantastic. Finally, his undoing, we just mentioned it. John chases the red figure into a room, and the red figure turns around, revealing that it is a small, old, elderly woman who then plunges a meat cleaver into his neck, and John bleeds to death on the floor.
Yeah.
With some very
with
70s,
a lot of red paint.
Some very 70s Italian film red blood, which is like that clearly this is not real blood, which it's like vibrantly red.
Violently red.
Yes. It's hilarious. I mean, the scene's actually very traumatic, but because like he's like spasming, it's like very intense. But the blood itself is very it's classic 70s horror movie blood. Is that how the movie, or is that what happens to John in the book?
Basically, except in the book, she throws a knife at his throat, which is objectively cooler, in my opinion.
A little strange. I mean, just hitting him with it makes a little more sense to me, but like throwing a knife, that's like some ninja shit, but like, I don't know, it just seems a little like interesting. But same idea.
I got the vibe that maybe she was like in the circus at some point. Okay. And there's no textual evidence for that.
That's fair.
Aside from like the general time period
and being like a little person.
The fact she's described in the book as a dwarf, which I honestly don't know what the preferred terminology is now.
Well, dwarf, dwarf is preferred for people who are dwarves, I
Yeah.
believe, but not all little people are dwarves, I
Right.
think. So,
Yeah.
and I also don't know
so-
what the preferred nomenclature
But like the general time period and like that aspect of it, and then the fact that she like throws the knife.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe this is supposed to be somebody who was in the circus.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible.
But again, that's my like
Just-
head canon.
yeah,
of
just
this.
guess. Yeah, just guessing. Yeah, no, that seems totally possible. Honestly, seems totally plausible. All right, that was all I had for Was That in the Book? I have one question that I was a little confused about, so let's talk about it in Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
During the seance scene with the sisters where Laura goes and is doing the seance, we cut to John, who's like snooping around, and he goes into some building. And he's snooping. He later says he was snooping, or I think. And I'm not sure what or where he was snooping, or what he was snooping on, or who. And he ultimately, some people kind of come out of a room, and he like scurries off.
Yeah.
Was that in the book? Do you have any idea what was going on
the
there?
seance scene is not in the book at all, so
okay.
I am afraid I cannot help with this. I also did not know what we were supposed to glean.
Yeah, I was like,
from
what is
that.
happening here?
Because initially I thought he was supposed to be snooping on them.
Yeah.
While they were doing the seance, but then it didn't seem like he was in the same place.
It didn't seem like it, but maybe he
he
was.
was.
Maybe
I don't
he was.
know.
Maybe that's what it was. Maybe he was actually, and that would at least track in the sense of like, it revealing his inner turmoil, like his inner grief got the better of him, and he ultimately did kind of want to see what was going on here because, as we find out over the course of the movie, that his grief is a lot greater than he is led on this whole time, and so he's sort of denying it and doesn't want to go, but deep down he's like, actually, maybe I kind of want to see what, maybe there is something to this, and maybe he's trying to sneak in, and then somebody else comes in. Maybe it is a hotel, like I said, because it seems to be, and like just one of the other patrons or something comes out, and he just kind of like, oh, never mind, I'm out. That would make sense at least. I think I'm gonna say that's what it is because that at least tracks. So, all right, it's now time to find out what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
The opening scene of this short story, there's a lot of dialogue in it that didn't age well, and I'm glad that got cut.
Yeah.
But I did think, so in this initial scene, it's them like sitting in a restaurant or somewhere in Venice, and they're playing this game that we come to find out is something that they've always done together as a couple, where they like make up dramatic backstories for the strangers that are around them. And in this case, it's the two psychic sisters.
Yeah.
They like see them and they're like making up like these wild stories about like who they actually are.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's some stuff in that did not age well. But I also thought that it was a good way to introduce us to their relationship dynamic.
Yeah.
And I thought it was an interesting scene because that's also something that I do.
Yeah, I say
Like,
we do that.
We do
sometimes.
that.
Yeah.
I've done that like with my friends, with my sister. Cutting that scene also cut the title drop.
Oh,
This
there's a title
story
drop.
starts with a title drop.
Oh, okay. Because I was actually going to
Yeah.
ask what why, because that's a thing that I didn't glean from the movie. I was like, I actually don't know why it's called Don't Look Now.
Don't look now, John said to his wife, but there are a couple of old girls 2 tables away who are trying to hypnotize me.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah. Don't look now,
There you go.
but there's somebody weird behind you.
That's where it comes from.
Speaking of the elderly sisters, in the book, they are identical twins.
Yeah, they're not in the movie.
No. And I understand that elderly identical twin actresses might have been kind of a tall order,
Yeah.
but that would have been so much creepier.
Yeah.
Apologies, twins of the world, but sometimes it's a little creepy.
Yeah. To be fair, and I think part of it is it does seem like I could be wrong, but it seems like the actress who plays the blind sister seems to be actually blind.
Yeah, she looks like she's actually blind.
Got a blind character, and if not, they got somebody who did a very good job because like there's little mannerisms and stuff like when she's walking up the stairs at the funeral at the end. Felt very realistic the way she like feels the steps and stuff.
Yeah.
And then apart from that, just like the way her eyes are like clouded or whatever, looked
if
very
not,
realistic.
She's very.
Yeah.
Those were very good contacts, especially for 1973.
Yeah.
My last thing in Better in the Book is a line that was in the movie that was not in the book. It was shortly before the sex scene.
It was like the lead-in to the having sex.
The lead-in, yeah. They're sitting on the bed together, and Laura tells John that he has toothpaste on his face.
Yep.
And he's like, eat it off. And I was like, ugh.
No, thank you.
Gross.
I will pass.
You nasty.
I will pass.
So I was glad that wasn't in the book.
Yep. Yes, indeed. All right, let's find out now what you thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
I really liked actually getting to see the sisters tell Christine that they saw her daughter.
Yeah.
This happens off screen in the book because John is the narrator.
Mm-hmm.
This is a limited third person, so we followed John the whole time.
Yeah.
So I liked getting to see that. I also liked Laura's fainting scene. I thought that was very drama.
Very dramatic, yes.
The seance scene was inscrutable in the best possible way.
Yes, I agree. I could not tell
I could not follow
initially what was
going on at all, but it was great. I liked that it was intercut with John, like, I guess in like a hotel lobby ringing a bell like he's already one of the dead.
Yeah.
Because that's a thing with seances. You have a bell.
Yeah.
And
yeah. He's definitely in the hotel lobby then. That's what, because that's before he goes wandering around. He's ringing that bell.
Yeah.
He was in the that was the hotel.
Because they have, and that's the thing with seances. You'll have like a bell or something.
That's a very classic.
And say, if there's anyone here.
Oh shit! I didn't even get that. That's brilliant.
And he's ringing the bell.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's good.
It was so strange. And then like when the sister has her like psychic fit, she sounds like she's having an orgasm.
Yeah, and she's like clutching her
she's
breasts,
like massaging her breasts.
I for sure was very confused.
So like strange and off-putting.
Yeah.
And great.
Yeah, very good.
I liked the scene where they're pulling the body out of the canal.
That was
also very disturbing.
If that wasn't a person pretending to be dead, that was a very convincing.
Yeah, very convincing.
Dummy, or it was a dead body. I don't know because it was very it was awful.
They just happened to be dragging the canal that day when they were filming.
I get
There's one point after John goes to the police about his supposedly missing wife where the police are like tailing him.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting and made sense because the romantic partner is always like suspect number one.
Always.
In a missing persons case. And my last thing here, I liked the extra mix-up of having Laura come back to Venice at the very end. 'Cause she doesn't come back in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I liked that kind of... It's almost like a classic hijinks, but like suspenseful and stressful, where they're all running around and like just missing each other.
Yeah, just not quite catching each other.
Yeah.
And she's like just behind him the whole time. Like she almost catches him in time to save him, but not quite. Yep, I agree. All right, we got a few things and the movie nailed it.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
We covered a lot of what I had in this section, but I had a couple other little things. Right after they meet the women, they go to a church, and the sisters are also there, and John like rushes Laura out real fast so that she doesn't see them.
I didn't get I'm glad you said that because I did not know what was going on in that scene. He looks like he's playing peekaboo. And I was actually wondering if that was intentional because he's hiding his face, but I couldn't tell who he was hiding his face from.
Yeah, they're there.
I didn't realize they were there.
Yeah, they show up at the same church, and then he like comes up with an excuse to like
Yeah.
rush her out right away because he doesn't want her to see them again.
Yes, and that totally makes sense now that you say that. I just at
Yeah.
the time was a little unsure that of what was going on.
The psychic sister also tells Laura that John also has the gift of second sight.
Yep.
He's just been suppressing it. He doesn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think we talked about this 2 other things already.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, he does call England. She's there.
And then
They do take the sisters into the police station. All right, so
Yeah,
that
but all long story short, a lot of things in
Yes.
the movie are very
a
similar.
lot of things in the movie are very similar. This is definitely one where the movie added rather than taking away.
Yeah, which makes sense with a short story, as we've
Yes.
talked about. That tends to be the case with short stories. All right, we've got a few odds and ends before we get to the final verdict.
You mentioned Solaris at the beginning of this episode. And that opening scene where we're just seeing rain on the pond immediately reminded me of Solaris.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is going to be another old movie that makes me need to pee, huh?
Yep. Also, I thought the blue credits in the opening was an interesting choice. They don't, to me, particularly fit, like tonally or like stylistically with the film at all. But you know, it's fine. I don't know. I would be interested for somebody if there's a reason that they're just like really generic blue, bright blue titles. Didn't really do much for me, but in terms of, it's just like that's a weird choice for the titles there.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the first shots in this movie was the little girl, Christine. And she's like got this like long, straight, bright blonde hair, and she's got her like red coat. She's frolicking outside, and for no reason, a white horse canters by. And I was like, oh, good. This is already the most 70s thing imaginable.
Yeah, it looks like a Fleetwood Mac album
Yes,
cover.
it does.
That's what it looks like. I was like, oh, just freeze frame. That's an album cover from the 70s. Like, pick your 70s,
Like
jam rock
folksy,
band. Yeah,
yeah.
folksy rock band. That's their album cover. Absolutely.
The white horse was what
Yes.
really got me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mentioned it earlier, but I did want to talk about it in a little more detail here about some of the really interesting stuff that goes on in that opening scene and why it was to me the most. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff throughout the whole movie, but why the first 10 minutes or so was to me just sort of chock full of really cool stuff. We get a bunch of really interesting match cuts between the parents inside and the kids outside. Like there's this moment where she asks for the cigarettes and John tosses her the cigarettes and it cuts mid-throw to, I think, one of the kids throwing the ball that ends up landing in the water. And then we cut back, and as John like does something and knocks over his drink, and that's what spills on the picture.
Yeah.
And then as he spills it, we cut outside, and it's the ball like landing in the lake matched with the drink being spilled. And then ultimately the thing that was really cool is that red liquid on the picture is like swirling up and around in a really weird way. It looks like why is it doing that?
Yeah,
But
like
then
a really unnatural
looking way. It's not just like, it's like, why would it run that way? But then we get the most intense dramatic shot of the whole movie, which is after John goes outside and finds her in the lake, this shot of him like bursting forth from the water, this like top down shot. And her red coat is in this brown water is like the exact shape of the streak of the red ink or whatever on the picture, which is just really striking and cool. And we get a classic Hitchcock oral match cut, which is a match cut that is, most match cuts traditionally are visually.
Yeah.
Like it's like I said, it's the red ink on the picture and then match cutting to the red coat in the water being like very similar, stuff like that. Oral match cuts, audio match cuts, whatever you want to call them, is where you match cut sounds together. And we get John is like struggling up the beach with the daughter, which is just horrifying. Like that scene where he's like carrying her body and like slipping inside is just the worst thing ever. Like that's again why the first 10 minutes of this movie I was like, Jesus Christ, like it's like so much going on and so just powerful and good. But we get like him struggling forever, and then we get like a split second of Laura seeing it and then starts screaming, and we immediately cut to like a drill, and we're now in Venice, and it's the drill match cut with her screaming, which is really, again, just the way it abruptly cuts and we jump forward is everything going on in that opening scene is like a masterpiece. I was just like blown away. There's also this weird moment where the mother makes Laura makes this hand motion with her over her mouth, and then we cut to the daughter doing like the same thing. Is really interesting. I don't know what that was or what. Anyways, super interesting stuff. All really great, and just I was blown away by the opening of the movie.
It sounds like you could like show that in film school.
You
as like
absolutely could. It's some of the most compacted, like it's some of the most dense, like film technique stuff, and like multiple different things going on. We have oral match cuts, visual metaphor and symbolism, and a premonition with these weird, like him, like. Just so much going on in that opening 5 minutes. It's wild. It's wild. I was super impressive.
On a lighter note.
Yes.
I don't want to get out of this episode without acknowledging.
Yeah, to acknowledge it, yeah.
That for the entirety, almost the entirety of this movie, basically the whole time they're
Most
in Venice,
of the middle part, yeah.
Donald Sutherland looks like he's trying to cosplay the Fourth Doctor.
Yes.
But couldn't quite remember what the costume looked like.
Absolutely. It is so close, but not quite.
Yeah. He's got a coat and he's got a scarf.
A colorful scarf.
A colorful square
and his hair
scarf.
is very similar,
yeah.
too. He's got the curly,
like big
curly,
kind of 70s.
Yeah. Curly hair.
Yeah. Although this movie actually predates that run, so if anything, the Fourth Doctor is cosplaying him.
Weird choice of cosplay there, Fourth Doctor. Weird choice. Before we get to the final verdict, we want to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us for $2, $5, or $15 a month. Get access to different things at each level. At $5, you get access to bonus content, including bonus episodes, including Get Out, which is I'm putting out soon. It'll be out momentarily. Sorry, a couple days late. Been busy. But it'll be out momentarily. Actually, it'll be out by the time you're hearing this. I feel confident in saying I'll make that happen. But it's not out by the time we're recording this. At the $15 level, you get priority recommendation status, which is what this was. This is one of our priority recommendations, and this was a request from one of our Academy Award winners, Gray Hightower. So, Gray, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Lots of fun discussion in this one. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, all those places. Go there, follow us, like us, whatever you got to do on those things, and keep up with us. Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
Now, I'm not here to knock on Daphne du Maurier. I've only read 2 of her short stories. So hardly a good sample.
Yes.
And I've never read the novel that she's most famous for, which is Rebecca. Mm-hmm. So this is not an overall indictment of her writing. But I do have to admit that I found this short story kind of boring and not very scary. It just wasn't very interesting to me.
Okay.
The movie, I thought, also had a couple low points. It was at times also boring. And occasionally hard to follow, although that might have been due to the sound mix, and I think a little bit the editing style. There are a lot of cuts in this movie, as we discussed, which is great, but at times hard to follow. I would not call this the scariest movie I've ever seen, but it did have a lot of subtly creepy, unsettling moments.
Yeah. I would agree. It definitely, I was hoping it would be a little scarier, but it definitely has a lot going. And I've watched it, ended up viewing it, and our discussion was much less about it as a horror movie and much more about it as like an art piece, like rumination on grief and stuff, which is way more interesting to me anyway.
But if you like subtle, creepy, and like unsettling, you'll probably like this. Yeah. I think the movie's strength over the short story lies in its expansion of John's role within the narrative. You asked earlier if John had a similar arc in the short story of seeming like he's over his daughter's death, but his inability to truly grapple with it being his downfall. And it's true that that is present in du Maurier's text, but the movie greatly expands on this element. By giving John more actions that are also symbolic of his internal struggle, the narrative feels much more fleshed out overall. And for that reason, primarily, I'm giving this one to the movie.
All right. There you go. The movie takes this one. Katie, what is up next?
Up next, we have our official Halloween episode.
The official spooky season episode.
And we will be talking about The Witches.
The Witches.
The book is by Roald Dahl.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be doing a listener's choice.
Listener's choice.
It'll be quick. The poll will not be up for very long, so make sure you get your votes in. We'll be doing a listener's choice between the 1990 and the 2020 versions of this film.
Fun fact that I cut out of the prequel because we had not revealed it at the time, and I didn't realize when we were recording the prequel, and I said it, and then Katie was like, "We haven't told that yet." Nicholas Roeg, the director of Don't Look Now, directed The Witches 1999,
which I would
1990.
Have never in a million years guessed.
Yeah. So if you're looking for, and also the writer, I believe, worked on.
One of the writers did.
Yeah. So we're doing back-to-back Nicholas Roeg films, which is interesting.
Well, maybe assuming that
if we do the 99,
assuming the 1990
version
wins.
If we don't, then yes, it will be. I don't even know who did the 2020.
I don't know.
Doesn't matter.
The only thing I really know about the 2020 version is that Anne Hathaway was in it.
Yes. But yeah, Nicholas Roeg did the 1990 version, so that I thought that was really interesting and unique. So go ahead, you follow us on social media. That's a very good reason, so you can vote on all of the different platforms and let us know which version we should do. And in 2 weeks' time, we'll be talking about The Witches just in time for Halloween. Is it right before Halloween?
Yeah.
Perfect. Just in time for Halloween. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.